Who killed Joseph Colombo? To many people like myself who consider myself a mobologist, kind of the working theory has always been Carlo Gambino, Thomas Lucchese, and a whole bunch of other people. But after today's discussion, you may think a little bit differently. Tom Levecki here with the latest edition of the Armchair NBA. Before we have our esteemed guest on, which I've been following and I'm really excited about, I just want to announce the Armchair NBA store is now open. We got a whole bunch of merch. We got hats, mugs. I even put my book on there. Feel free to check it out, Armchair Store NBA. Also, check out my latest interview with Judge Gleason, who was a prosecutor who put away John Gotti. So I want to introduce my next guest, Don Capria, author of the Colombo Book. This is a must-read, not a like-to-have, not to put on my wish list, not to hope to get as a gift. My wife went to the hospital yesterday. She had contractions. We thought it was a big day. It was early labor. I took one book. This is the book. Here's the author today, Don Capria. Welcome to the Armchair NBA. How you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you for having me, Tom. Thank you.
All right, Don, I have to admit, I've been following you, and I want to kind of give you first shout out to the Italian American podcast, John, Rosella, and Pat. Please check out their podcast. I first heard Don on there, as well as Lisa Babick. Shout out to Lisa, and I've been super intrigued by your book. So we're going to jump right in. Who was Joseph Colombo?
In my personal opinion, after interviewing so many people that knew him and reviewing his entire life, he was a born leader. He was one of these guys that no matter what he got involved in, whether it was the unions organization or if it was his real estate business, if it was organized crime, as we saw later on, the Italian American Civil Rights League, he was a fixer, and a fixer by nature is a bit of a director. He could have been a movie director. He could have been someone that knew how to tackle problems in the moment, work them out with multiple people involved, and then get things rolling again. So for me, he was a fixer and he was a leader at the core.
Now, one thing I like about Don, and part of the reason I'm really excited, he authored this book with Anthony Colombo, rest in peace, who was the son of Joseph Colombo. Tell us a little bit about Anthony, Joseph's son.
I mean, I've been writing and doing entertainment projects most of my adult life, and working with him was the easiest relationship that I ever had with someone that hired me to write a story, and especially the trust level that had to go into this with him writing a story about his father that he waited 40 years to take on. So with that, one of the first days we sat down together to do interviews, he said, Don, you may ask questions about me to other people, and someone could refer to me as a dinosaur. Mm-hmm. He said, when they call me that, I want you to thank them for me. He goes, because I do come from that old era, and this shape of what you think I am is what I am. And that kind of sold everything for me, because he is that, exactly what he says he's going to do, and exactly who he says he is. And that's so rare today. So, Anthony was a great family man. He has, 5 kids. He grew up amongst 5 brothers and sisters. And he was just a really solid human being. And I enjoyed the interview process with him, the writing process with him. We've even been out together. And then, I would see him. He moved to California in his last year and a half. So I would see him in California, even when he was hospitalized, and we continued our relationship. I'm very fond of him as a human being beyond the project.
So that's one of the things I like about you is, I'm not going to lie. I was expecting, because you were co-authoring with Anthony, and I kind of saw your interviews, stand-up guy, straight shooter, the real deal, proud Italian American, which I salute. But I was worried about you being not as objective towards his father and his legacy. And the truth of the matter is, I thought you were more than fair. You didn't go with rose-colored glasses. You kind of said, hey, listen, here's who he was and who he was. He didn't sugarcoat it. but the same token, I think you were respectful, which I like. So I kind of we're in the lexicon here with Colombo, right? You kind of have the Italian American Civil Rights League. My parents, when they came over from Italy, I remember they were making sauce one day outside in August, and the Irish neighbor would call us gypsies. People don't really understand. I'm not crying, woe is me. But even my family directly missed out on opportunities because of lack of speaking English or just being Italian, even in an Irish neighborhood. So that's near and dear to my heart. So when you started writing the book, what's kind of the first thing that you discovered about Joseph Colombo that surprised you?
There was a bunch of them. I don't know what the first thing was. I think maybe learning the pedigree that his father. I didn't know that his father was murdered when he was 14, and
Yeah, I didn't know that either. Yeah,
that drew great interest to me because, when I first got picked into or interviewed actually to write the book, it was a Q&A. I sat down with Anthony. It was very interesting. I got a phone call from someone. They said, we heard you wanted to do something about Joe Colombo. You need a blessing from one of the children. So I went up to a diner in upstate New York and sat down and met Anthony. I met Anthony's son, who would be Joe Colombo's grandson, Anthony Jr., and a man named Ray Vanacore, who had the agent in Hollywood, Mickey Freiberg, that was going to put all of these pieces together to create the book. So when they Q&A'd me, I knew the same thing that a lot of guys that, were mobologists, were aficionados, right? Yeah. And we know the same few paragraphs that were written about Joe Colombo in multiple books, from Rob to all of them. And that was always the most interesting thing to me, was that there was no expansion. It was just, he was, involved in the Bonanno coup. He took Gambino's side. He started the Italian American Civil Rights League. He got shot for it. It was Gambino with Gallo and the story. And I couldn't, I'm an investigator by nature, and I couldn't really believe all of that. So, we started the story in 1938, as a 14-year-old kid's father gets killed, execution by other gangsters, and then he starts his path. So for me, that was super interesting because I started to have his motivations. And when I spoke about, what he could be earlier on as a leader, part of what I learned from the crime side, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, was that the main reason, in my analogy or my hypothesis of him, is that he got involved in organized crime to find the killers of his father. He could have easily gone. He was mentored by Carlo Gambino, so he could have easily gone into the Gambino crime family and been a person inside that, but he didn't. He went to the Profaci family. He stayed within the family that was responsible for his father's murder. And then we could talk about it again, but in 1967, there was major events that happened that kind of proved all of that true. So,
well, I think I want to kind of dive, because I don't want to give too much away, but the same token, this is some good stuff. Your working hypothesis, and it's a sound one, is it may not have been the mob who did it. So walk us kind of through that a little bit, Don.
Yeah, the assassination attempt, because he lived in almost
7 years, right?
For 7 years. He died in 1978. So that attempt was well planned. It was very, very pre-planned. There was months of preparation that went into getting Jerome Johnson into the press junket circle for that Unity Day rally. This is before the rally, so there's only about 10,000 people there. It was the largest police presence in the history of New York's NYPD, including homicide detectives that Seaman wanted there because they had heard that something could go down. So
and our mobsters.
Yeah, and the FBI, and I wouldn't be surprised if the CIA was also there as well, because we've seen these conspiratorial assassinations that have happened many times before and afterwards, and it always boils down to a few things that there's no smoking gun, right? But you have these few pieces of evidence that just don't sit right into the formula. Correct. One of the first things I always said to people, and this has to do with code, is that when have you ever seen a mob assassination where there were women and children in the immediate area and they hired a gunner from outside of one of the families to take care of the hit?
Especially back then.
Right. So then we lay that on Crazy Joe Gallo, Joey the Blonde, it was his name, and he's Ubats. He would do anything.
Yeah.
The problem, my first problem, which I talk about in the book with Gallo organizing this, is that he was in prison, and he organized hits on Joe Colombo. I don't, nothing escaped me when it came to researching Gallo's hatred for Joe Colombo. I met people that were with them in that era. He definitely wanted to kill Joe and start his own family, but he didn't have enough time and he didn't have enough access to start planning it before he came home. So it just didn't add up in that timeline. And also, with all due respect to Gallo for what he did, but he wasn't as cunning to put together a plan with so many layers like this, buying the camera in Boston, making sure that Jerome Johnson stays out of jail, keeping Jerome Johnson clothed and fed and with money in his pocket, and keeping him quiet. And then, the $50,000, we all know Gallo came home broke. So it's a very, very interesting and easy. It's very easy in one respect to say that it was Joe Gallo and close the case, and then Gallo dies a year later. Boom, done. But it's way more interesting if you start looking at all the details that Gallo couldn't have been a part of. And also, it's a death sentence. Yeah. Gallo's telling everyone that he wants to get at Joe Colombo. He wants permission. He wants to do it. And then he does it in front of women and children, 10,000 people in Columbus. It's a death sentence.
Correct. Now, before we kind of get to some of the other fallacies as well, or perceived fallacies, what happened to the 50 grand?
You're not there yet. So, but for the sake of the podcast, we'll go to that. And I tracked down an officer by the name of Giuliani Schiozzi. Tony's is his name. Yeah. And he was the officer that ran at Jerome Johnson, tackled him, and busted the gun out of his hand, then held him down while other officers came. They held him, and he was shot in the back, but he did not die. I know this because Officer Schiozzi took him with another officer to Roosevelt Hospital. Yep. And he was alive in the ambulance. He was alive at arrival. He died on the bed in Roosevelt Hospital. Now, when they went to Roosevelt Hospital, and I have this on tape, I still talk to Giuliani, actually, not too long ago. He told me, when I interviewed him, I said, how many people came in and interviewed you to go over this? Because I know the FBI claims they did not investigate the murder, but I know that I have tons of paperwork that they were investigating it. Yeah. So he said, you're the first person to interview me about the murder since it happened. Jesus. So right there, I'm just like, okay, this is interesting. And as the story came out, he told me that when he took Jerome Johnson to Roosevelt Hospital, he took Jerome Johnson's body, he took 2 handguns and 2 satchels. One of the satchels had the $50,000 in it. Yeah. When he was at the hospital, Jerome Johnson died. Detective Seidman showed up into the room with homicide detectives. Yeah. He looked at Jerome Johnson's dead body. He looked at the guns. They placed the guns into evidence bags, opened the satchel, looked at Giuliani Schiozzi and said, who knows about the bag? And he said, no one. He said the guns made it into evidence. The money never did.
Wow. Kind of like the, what was it? The French Connection heroin. Well, that made in, but then it went out. All right. Yeah. So here's what's interesting though about all this is they took count. So I'm with you on this, right? If it's a state investigation, it's post-mortem, right? Like the guy gets killed and then the state comes in. The state's not proactive, right? It's not a Tom Cruise movie. They didn't know something was going to happen, right? But yet at the actual hit, somebody mysteriously started taking cameras from the crowd and they started sequestering cameras, which feels federal-ish.
Very federalist, very similar to Dallas, JFK assassination. There were not just cameras, there were film cameras shooting in real time. And a lot of that was confiscated by the FBI. There was a photo that they had of the female accomplice of Jerome Johnson that they believe was in on it, that possibly walked the gun in. And that photo, everyone knew about. And the feds did not want to release it. The NYPD never released it on television to say, we're looking for this woman. They let that trail go cold. There was a lot of interesting things about the kind of almost cover up that we're not investigating this. But again, there's an FBI number on Jerome Johnson. So they have a jacket on him. If you never investigated it, why you have a jacket on him?
Correct.
That was even prior to the shooting. And then for Seidman, he kind of had a standoff on television at the time versus, I want to say it was Holman. And Holman was OC task force for the FBI. Seidman was the chief of detectives for the NYPD. And while Seidman was dead set that this was a mob slaying and that it came from, this camp and it was this much money, Holman was on Channel 4, Channel 2. He was saying, no, it wasn't. We don't believe that the mob executes in this way. We want to do so I don't know how far Holman got with that. I think someone ended up telling him he had to kind of keep quiet and just leave it alone because it's not our investigation. Not keep quiet like we did it, keep quiet, but just look, this is not your jurisdiction and it's making Seidman look bad. But I truly believe that Seidman, who he said multiple times on television that, hey, I know what it costed and I know the exchange. Well, we know why Seidman know what it costed because he had the money.
Yep.
Right. And then further than that, there was an FBI informant that was telling him it was Joe Gallo's camp for $50,000 they paid him. And once Seidman heard that from an informant, he knew the informant to be credible. Why? Because Seidman had the money and knew that the number was correct.
Ooh.
So Seidman was dead set on all of this happening, not knowing that he's being sold the frame up. If there was a frame up, right? Like that would intentionally, it would make perfect sense for, look, if this guy trusts me and I could tell him a number that no one knows but him, and he can believe that number in rolling out the story.
Well, that is called a disinformation tactic, which is also used by
the FBI,
the CIA, and the FBI.
A couple of months after Colombo's shooting, we know in Pennsylvania there was a group of students that broke into an FBI field office, and this story is it's been made into a documentary and a movie. It's about COINTELPRO. So J. Edgar Hoover started the COINTELPRO, which is counterintelligence program, in the late 1950s, mimicking a CIA program that we used overseas to spread information, disinformation, so that we can take care of political coups and really work the.
I think it was they'll hide behind it but at the time I think the working theory was it was supposed to counter, I think, ingrown communism. And number two, I don't know if it was legal. I don't think it was legal, by the way. But
I mean, they had to pay for the Fred Hampton murder. They were proven responsible for the murder of Fred Hampton. They were any political dissident group, whether it was the Black Panthers or the communists or the Nazis. I knew, and I write about it in the book with FBI documents to back it up, that they were part of a small operation where they were sending the mobsters letters that communists were moving into the neighborhood and planning to bomb mob hangouts.
Yep.
And they were doing this to create tension and have the mob people hopefully potentially rub out some of these communists. So it's a tactic that they've used even in organized crime. They would pin families, they knock on someone's door, boom, boom, and this happened to Anthony. Knock on the door and say, listen, we can't tell you anything except for this. You're in danger. Someone from the Cosmo crime family is planning to kill you. And, Anthony says, well, if they're planning to kill me, why wouldn't you go and arrest these people? But you'll tell me in hopes that there will be, a preemptive strike and a murder. And now their business is booming,
I never understood that. It's like, hey, you're in danger. Because I can't go into specifics. I can tell you offline. Our old show, I partnered with a former OC member, and from credible sources, we showed up on some wiretaps, nothing threatening or anything like that, but we showed up on some wiretaps and stuff. And it was like, well, if we showed up on wiretaps, like you just you let it go, like it's okay, they come kill me.
Yeah, who you pick and choose it's your taxpayer dollars are allowing you to pick and choose the type of crime you're going to prevent. The different people that you might or might not save.
Yeah, that fat guy with the beard, he's expendable. So if they're going to talk about him, let's not let him know for the greater good of society. All right, well, we'll move on there.
Yeah.
All right. So I want to touch on this, and then I want your views on some other stuff as well. Because I'm 400 interviews deep. I'm equally excited about my most important interview is you, because there's so much layers to this, so much to unpack. Because you tie in the Italian American experience, you tie in respectfully Cosa Nostra, good investigative journalism, and so forth. Now the Fox was Carlo Gambino, so I would have put it past Gambino to do this and make it look like a conspiracy. So why don't you walk us through that?
Yeah, I mean, it's very plausible. I laid out the Gambino theory, and I think my only real defense was the information on how close Anthony was and Joe was to Carl Gambino. He came from the same neighborhood in Sheepshead Bay. Carl Gambino was very fond of Anthony Durante, which is AKA Anthony Colombo, Joe's father, who was an assassin prior to even there being the five families. You know, he was involved with the Yale organization, which ran most of South Brooklyn.
Al Capone's mentor. Al Capone's mentor.
Al Capone's mentor, yes, who ended up killing Yale, you know, because of the disagreement with the Union Sociale. So Colombo's father and Gambino being so close when his father was assassinated and Joe's mother and sister moved out to California, Carl stayed as mentor and promised that he was going to take care of him and rear him. And they had a relationship that no one knew about. They kept it in secret.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of truth to Carl being very upset with Joe for going after the Italian American Civil Rights League with such ferocity and chasing down the FBI and going and batting down the doors at City Hall and fighting the good fight, because Carl Gambino was about staying in the shadows, working with criminal enterprises. And he thought while Joe was modern, he took a chance on him, right? Yeah. So while Joe was a modern version, and he did believe in that, he did not believe in speaking to the press. And I think that's, in some respects, I think Joe was possibly done with that and didn't know how to get out of it and just ran straight forward with the league, knowing the consequences could have been fatal.
Well, so I have a simple working theory why it wasn't Carlo Gambino. It's pretty simple. The commission, which at that time in New York, and maybe to this day, are 5 heads, right? And all the commission is a board of governors, board of directors, right?
Right.
And the way the board of directors work is there's a chairman, which let's call it Carlo Gambino, and you need 3 out of 5, right? So you got Carlo Gambino, Tommy Lucchese by marriage, old school Sicilian, and then now you control Colombo. They controlled Colombo.
Right.
So that's his vote. He doesn't want to lose that vote. He doesn't want to replace with Joe Gallo. He doesn't want it replaced with Thomas DeBella or even Carmine Persico. He controlled Colombo. So my working theory, that's I don't get me wrong. Could I go deeper? Sure. But I kind of land on that. So which brings us to.
But also, I'll say one more thing in the book is there was a sit down prior to the final Italian American Civil Rights League where Joe seceded and told Carl face to face in back of his home that he was going to be done as the front person for the league, that he was handing this over to Anthony, that he was going to start taking the shadows, that he would go to the uni day, he would not speak on the dais. So there was a a pullback, that, so to speak, that he was going to have that was settled as far as that personal relationship went. Got it.
Now, and I don't want to take away, and your book doesn't either, the importance of the Italian American Civil Rights League, because the truth of the matter is, at the time we had Unico, there was Cal. These were organizations, but these were fluffy, respectfully bullshit. I don't want to say anything because I don't want to piss off John. There's a lot of organizations that maybe now have more pull and more interest, but back then they were just facades to try to corral votes, which I think were frankly controlled by the powers that be. But they took head on. They boycotted outside the FBI.
Very boots on the ground. Very boots on the ground.
Yeah, and you know how it works, Don. When you start to do something, that's when that's when you go.
The Attorney General had to get on the news and say that they were taking the words Mafia and La Cosa Nostra out of all government documentation.
Wow.
So to be a fly on the wall when
Yep.
someone told him that he needed to do that, you
Yep.
know, they were bowing down to what they knew was a mob boss, right? So let's just, if you pull the veil and you're under the assumption that Joe Colombo 110% was a mafia boss,
Yeah.
and he was involved in the Italian American Civil Rights League,
Correct.
I understand it didn't matter. It
Yep.
didn't matter to the people, and it didn't matter to the government. So the government, is running the smear campaign to try to get him, to defame him. But the problem was he was making so many small accomplishments and continuing the fight that all the people that were behind him, they weren't going to be deterred by a newspaper article or an arrest for some real estate fraud or a possible bank robbery that someone said that he told them to do. It was just so convoluted. But what wasn't convoluted was the rally in Columbus Circle, the Columbus Day rally, the picketing at the FBI, the picketing of the New York Times, the picketing of the Staten Island Advance, the people that showed up on Wednesdays and got their chance to speak to the members of the dais, and within 24 hours, the problems were solved. The car accident that the insurance company faulted them for and knocked them off the policy, and all these different things that were happening to Italian Americans in the 50s and the 60s. And you mentioned language earlier about speaking the language. One of the things I always wanted people to understand about Joe Colombo is the era that he grew up in, and that post-World War II era was a very interesting time for an Italian American who was born in America.
Yep.
Because they were watching their parents and their friends' parents get harassed by the FBI because Hoover had a giant Red Scare going on. And there were literally people that spoke Italian at their jobs to another Italian that were fired from their jobs. Their bank assets frozen. They had their houses searched because of the scare, because of what Mussolini was a part of, in Axis powers. And when Joe Colombo fought in the war, saw action, saw friends die, and comes home to this, he had a very strong hatred for the FBI at an early age.
Well, it was kind of like a boiling point. So Italians, especially old school, have an inherent that we got from Italy, an inherent distrust for the states. You kind of have that pillar, if you will, right? Then you throw in, there's two things that Italians don't like. We don't like fascists. I'm sorry, we don't. And number two is we don't love communists. Now it's funny. I have a communist cousin in Italy, but the communist part in Italy is like 2%, right? The point being is Italians don't like communists.
Sooner to be an anarchist.
Correct. Exactly. They don't like communists or fascists. Socialism is another discussion, but what I'm saying is the working rule is those are fascists and fascists and comunista no me piace, right? Keep it simple. So I get that part. So I see and I get how they would kind of tickle the wire with the mobsters to go against the Westerns.
Yeah.
And then when it was convenient, they went against the mob, right? Which is a whole nother discussion. But there was dynamics to Colombo that people don't realize. He was a veteran. He was also a Freemason.
Yeah.
And he had institutional power, like, talked about like omitting certain things, but like locally and that kind of stuff. So I think that's kind of all, again, you look at not just a single body of evidence, but the broader body of evidence, it kind of supports your theory. So I don't want to give too much away and get the book, Colombo Book, and I want to talk about some other subjects as well. But to wind up the discussion on the book, Don, where did you end up, without giving too much away? Where did you kind of end up, and what should people look out for?
As far as my theory on the shooting,
like how, like, do you think it was more FBI? Do you think there's a CIA tinge, a little bit of both?
I think it was definitely FBI. In my depiction of what happened, not definitely like I have the evidence to it, but I spent a lot of time on the FBI CIA conspiracy because a lot of that stuff, the ballistics report on the gun, the way that it was executed, the fact that Greg Scarpa was already working with them and he was already doing operations for the FBI and the CIA at the time. So, I do think that they were the most capable. One of the main questions I had to answer as I was writing this book, and I just sat there and it's just like, what guy is going to walk into Columbus Circle with that amount of police presence, right? a gun, a mission, and going to pick up the bag after he shoots someone in the back of the head 3 times and think he's walking out. So what kind of convincing had to take place for that to happen? And the only thing I can really think of is if law enforcement at some level was involved with him to lead him to believe that he would be cuffed. Think of Lee Harvey Oswald, right?
Yeah.
He gets escorted out. We always see these shooters, they get escorted out,
Yep.
So, the whole Jeffrey Epstein, right? Oh, he's not even dead. They cuffed him and they did all this, and then they pretend he's dead so that he can go live on another island. Look, it's great. I love diving down the rabbit hole, but it's our job to be critical thinkers and to examine each piece of this puzzle. And that was the one piece that really made me believe that at some level law enforcement was involved.
Now, in my research, I didn't see a ton of. Have you gotten pushback on the book? People calling you the tinfoil hat guy. Any pushback, or has it been smooth sailing for the most part?
No, it's been smooth sailing. I think, I laid out multiple theories. I didn't just go in and say, this is what Anthony and I, but actually, even with Anthony and I, it wasn't ever a moment where it was like, this is what's going to get written. I think the firmest that he was with the book, which was totally respectful, was, look, I want to tell a story about my father from the day I was born until a couple of months after the shooting.
Yeah.
That's how I knew my father. And I'm going to be completely honest. I never knew my father or believed my father was in organized crime. Did I suspect it? Of course I did.
Yeah.
Multiple times with the arrests, with the people that he knew in the paper. Did I ever call him on it? No, I was fearful of my father. I did in the end bring a few articles to his attention and say to him, what is this? And he told me, I will not go to jail for this. This is them trumping up charges to try to bring me down. Do not believe what you read in the paper. Do not believe the FBI. Now, this is also at a time where Anthony and his wife were being harassed by Boland and Welsh daily.
Yep.
Daily they were being harassed. So he can't really believe these people. And then the guy that gave birth to him, that taught him everything that he knows. And then when he beats the charges, and you have Barry Slotnick, the great attorney, telling him, your father's not going to go to jail for this. This is trumped up. Who are you going to believe? So I kept that respect, and we kept those parameters when writing the book, that this is not Anthony Colombo in the 80s that may have learned his father was the leader of this crime family and was involved in, whatever activities as a racketeer. It was, no, this is how I knew my father through the eyes of him up until he was 26.
Yeah. And we're gonna cut on some other topics. So just again, the Colombo book, the link below. Required reading. It's not even, this ain't even move. I have about 7 books. I pushed everything away. I grabbed my bag last night to go to the hospital. I grabbed the Colombo book. So I'll be locked up for a few days when my son does come, and I'm excited to finish it. You brought up Greg Scarpa, right? And I still don't get it. I know I'll get the comments. Lindley DeVecchio was there was a whatever happened there. He got off, or he got, light sentence. But it's like the marriage of the mob back then and the FBI and their handlers, now that we have freedom of information and some other stuff, it's at the very least, you got to at least think and say, hey, wait a second, what's going on here? So give us your thoughts on the whole Scarpa thing and him being the high value informant.
He was the first one that really did damage, and that's probably why we saw so much talk in the media about the Colombo crime family. It wasn't that they were doing any more than any of these other families.
Yeah,
it was just more the potential that they had to get the stories out from someone that was working within the organization. So a lot of the stuff about Joe Colombo, even the stuff about the Gallo-Profaci war, I think he started in '63, but it doesn't mean that the information that he was giving them, the structure and the understanding, it could date back to before that. A lot of the problems that I had with Scarpa and some of the things he said is that all of these men they're being paid to tell story.
Correct.
So, like myself.
Yeah.
So the more story I come up with, the more I'm going to get paid. And the more that they learn to work the system, the more the credibility just disappears. So I can totally respect the FBI for what they do in one aspect, because they're starting off by saying that they want to fight crime. They want to help society become a better place.
Correct.
But then at some other spot, this just becomes a giant game of Monopoly.
Yes.
And they monopolize the tax dollars so that they can create this facade that they're fighting crime, but crime doesn't disappear. You don't fight crime at the top level. It's kind of like a a Ponzi scheme that we're caught up in with the FBI and the organized crime task force that we see. And then if we fast forward to 2021, and you look at how far they've taken this, take the rapper Tekashi 6ix9ine, right?
Yeah.
So they make an informant out of a SoundCloud rapper who's flashing money and girls and all the stuff, and they killed someone and they talked about him on the phone and they get this kid to completely walk scot-free, being involved with a street gang that was involved in multiple murders and drug dealing, right? So just take that for one micro and tell me, what is that a billboard for? That is a billboard for young children to go out and kill the streets, have no loyalty, no honor, no code, and know they can get off the hook by telling on someone.
Wow, you're right.
Need to stop crime. That's a farce. This is
Now,
not stopping crime.
Now, this leads an easy transition to Sammy the Bull. You've been pretty vocal about Sammy. I had him on the show. I just had Judge Gleason on, who. I'm kind of, my current rabbit hole is I've dealt a lot with informants and having former people on, but I've been doing more, journalists, authors, which I love, and then a little bit of law enforcement. Law enforcement sees Sammy and informants much differently than less civilians or even mob guys. Where do you land on Sammy? And you have some pretty strong thoughts about that. I've seen it on some other interviews.
Yeah, I mean, I think that he just felt that he was the chosen one. It's a very narcissistic way to live your life, to believe that you're more important than others. And everyone thinks there's something heroic about losing your loyalty to save yourself, because that guy was going to do something bad. We all know John Gotti wasn't going to snitch, right? Yeah. Now, whether Sammy had to die for things that he did, no kid on Instagram that takes a picture with him and promotes him as this, this hero, Ragnar Lothbrok killer that became an informant. You don't know what happened inside that criminal organization that led John to some of those words. You just don't. You never will. You're not a criminal.
Correct.
And if you were a criminal, you weren't a criminal at the level those men were at. Okay, so for anyone to just kind of sum it all up in the fact that it was, Gotti was going to do it in two sentences, I can't even speak to people like that, because it's like you're trying to talk about, something metaphysical when you know nothing about the elementary stuff, right?
Correct.
And Sammy understands that he's not what he says he is. It's nothing that he's not been hit with before. And when I say that, I mean in respect to you don't just take out Gotti. This is not a one for one.
Yeah.
You sat on so many trials and put so many men away, and you became their pawn. And you even with your own family members and the case that he had in Arizona, and it's just, and then he goes and tries to profit from it with a book, and now he's got a YouTube channel, and he wants to, he's got a problem with fame, and that is attributed to the narcissism. So it's a whole it's called splitting. And it's a whole psychological disorder that he suffers from. And, look, yes, he's outlived a lot of these guys. If that makes you a success in life, then more power to him. I can't agree with anything that he's done, because, even though I'm younger, I come from an old school mentality, and I believe you do the crime, you do the time. I'm still a fan of that. And like I said about the Tekashi 6ix9ines and all these other kids that are out there gang banging until, the cop shows them the McDonald's and you're going to get out of here in 45 minutes. Your life's not worth it to lock up 10 dudes. Nobody has a life worth more than 10, 15 dudes. Nobody.
You make a great point. And, for those that I get pushback on, I admit I've had people on that may have, embellished, or they may have shared their stories, and they feel like I platform rats, right? And they're welcome to feel that way. But here's the deal. I will give equal, if not more time than good people like yourself willing to share your voice and exercise your freedom of speech and your opinion, for people to say, yay, they might watch my Sammy interview, but they're also welcome to watch Don and then help them form their own opinion. And you bring a lot of valid points. So listen, I had high expectations of this interview. I have this book, required reading. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. Anybody below, because if they watch this far along, drop require reading. Right. I'm going to give away a few books for those people that write it. They drop required reading on the bottom, nothing else, because I don't want to tee people off. That means you watch it this far. I'll pick a few of you guys out, and I'll send a few of you guys a book because this is required reading. Don, I'm going to put a link below to the Amazon link to buy the book. But how do people find you if they want to search for you on social media?
Yeah, we have a Instagram account. It's just at Colombo Book. My personal Instagram is just at Don Capria. And there's also a Facebook page, Colombo Book. And there's colombobook.com, which is a website that has all of the links to our socials.
Did it make bestseller on Amazon? In my research, I think it did, right?
I think it did. I don't remember. The book's been out for a while. The recent resurgence came from last year's 50 years since the shooting. And now this year is the 50-year anniversary of the Godfather film, which I've been doing a lot of press and promo surrounding this new TV show called The Offer.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Oh, my God, the biggest part. So walk us through that. I skipped over probably one of the bigger parts of the interview.
Without trying to sell the book, it's a very good read because it's not a mafia book. This is a book that has to deal with, a father and a son and their relationship with the backdrop of this organized crime lifestyle, but then dives deeper into this Italian-American Civil Rights League and all of the things that Anthony was working with his father, which ultimately led to his dad's shooting. So, I urge anybody that is a fan of history to read the book, not just someone that's stuck in the mob genre. But yeah, so recently, Al Ruddy, he helped write and produce a television show about his life and the making of the Godfather film.
Yes.
And, I've been doing some speaking about it, and I was very hopeful because I interviewed Al Ruddy when I wrote the book. I interviewed, Mark Seal, who wrote Leave the Gun, Take the Cannoli, a book on the Godfather film. I've read Harlan Lebo's book. I've been a Godfather aficionado for many, many years.
Yeah.
And I think I'm a bit of an authority on the subject because I know so many personal stories. So, they got Joe Colombo very wrong. They created their own version of him. I reached out to Giovanni's agent and manager in hopes of sharing about 15 hours worth of never before seen footage of Joe Colombo.
Wow.
But beyond that, there is footage, NBC, CBS, there's footage of Joe speaking. So you can just see right from that he gets it wrong with the impulsiveness and the kind of clock it back to the old school Hollywood version of an Italian-American gangster.
Yeah.
They got it right with The Godfather, which made it so ironic to me that here was finally a film that understood that bosses are reserved. Bosses are already powerful, so they don't need to exert power, verbose, and these giant acts of impulsiveness. It's very, very much more calculated. And Al Ruddy met and wrote about it, and he spoke about it during my interviews, how he felt about Joe. He said this was a guy where you looked at him and the last thing you thought was he's involved in organized crime. He was a businessman.
Yes.
So Ribisi's portrayal, unfortunately, it falls so far south of what Joe really was. And I understand art. I'm an artist myself. Yeah. I like to write and create. But for me, to change the depiction of who he was and not pay attention to how he spoke and acted, it's the same way as the wardrobe designer putting Joe Colombo in a wife beater and a pair of Bahama shorts and saying, nah, we know how he dressed, but we just want him to wear the beach shorts because that's my impersonation of him. So that's where I think it falls so far south. It's that you knew you had access to really grip the character, and you just chose to be, bippity boppity. I call them, water gun gangsters or whatever.
Well, the thing is, there's a few parts unpacked there. Number one, Giovanni Ribisi, being an Italian-American, you think he'd want to fully portray and work his craft. That's why, with all due respect, he's not in the Pacino, De Niro, discussion, right? So that's number one, and he falls short there. Number two, when you message me, you're like, listen, here's kind of where I land on this. You could have just saluted the offer. We love Giovanni Ribisi. Hey, have him come out to here, and here. And you could have sold a lot more units of books, but you're like, no. And you still will sell. But what I'm getting at is you're like, no. Here's where this this plot is and here's the actors are, rather than just salute, you stuck to your guns and your morality and said, sorry, it may help book sales if I sign off, but my integrity comes first. And
and I'll say it here first, Al Ruddy lied. And he did it for self-preservation. He waited for everyone to die. He creates this television series. He puts a scene inside it that I saw last week that I almost wanted to call him, but I knew it was an impulsive move.
Yeah.
Where he's in a basement where Joe Colombo has someone tied up in the basement, pissing his pants. And I just thought the way you described Joe to me and the admiration you had for him, he told me, I wish I could have spent more time with Joe because I really think I would have enjoyed him. Correct. And to go and do this to him after he's dead and his son has passed away, to me, I just think, he's trying to sell more, and look, man, you made the greatest gangster film of all times. And then here you go defaming Italian Americans, for the sake of your self-preservation and a little bit more of the evil, antagonist role had to be pitched into there, I guess, Sad.
I agree, and very well said. Thank you, Don, for being on the Armchair NBA. Please check out the Colombo book, required reading.